it is clear that Jesus is an extraordinarily special person. And so it is no surprise now that great crowds of people are flocking to see Jesus. In John chapter 6, we read one of the most famous stories in the Bible, the feeding of the 5,000. By the way, this is the only miracle that occurs in all 4 Gospels, apart from the resurrection, of course. And so every Gospel writer thinks, I can't really tell the Jesus story without telling you what happened on this occasion. That is how rich and profound and powerful this passage is. So there are 5,000 men who have gathered, which means there are, who knows, between 10 and 20,000 people, all sat round listening to Jesus, and eventually all needing to be fed. Notice in verse 4, we are told deliberately, the Jewish Passover festival was near. Now, if you understand what a big deal that was for that culture, you will know that they are all, in the back of their mind at least, thinking about the themes from the Exodus story, how God powerfully overthrew the Egyptian empire and saved his people from certain ruin. Now, think of all these parallels that tie this story in John 6 back to the Exodus account. In both cases, there's a vast multitude of people. They are out in the middle of nowhere. The people can't provide for themselves. They can't gather their own food. In both cases, this miraculous bread appears, and in both cases, they eat and are satisfied. There is one thing that is notably absent in Jesus' day. There is no revolution here, not yet. They're still enslaved to the Romans, just as the Israelites were once enslaved to the Egyptians. And we'll soon find out here then that some people are wondering, is this the one who will literally, physically, violently deliver us from our oppressors? Look at verse 14. This is after the people have been fed. The people saw the sign Jesus performed, and they began to say, surely this is the prophet who is to come into the world. But Jesus, knowing that they intended to come and make him king by force, withdrew again to a mountain by himself. What kind of a frenzied state would the crowd need to be in to make somebody king by force? If you do that in the Roman Empire, crown somebody else as king, what are you doing? You are inviting war upon yourself. So make no mistake, these people really do think this man is the Messiah, and we are expecting a dramatic, miraculous delivery here through him. And yet, surprisingly, Jesus withdrew to a mountain by himself. So it doesn't go the way the crowd expect, and they are, at the very least, confused. Skip forward to verse 30, and you'll see they begin to question Jesus, effectively saying, look, our ancestors were given the same sign, bread from heaven, a sign that Moses really was sent from God, a prophet. In other words, we can see these obvious parallels between the two stories. God feeds his people in the wilderness. We are in the middle of nowhere. We feast on bread that came from thin air. We can see this is a miracle that came from God. We can see all these similarities in how these stories play out, but we just don't know. What is your part in the story, Jesus? Are you a modern day Moses? And Jesus responds by saying, no, I am not Moses in the story. I am the bread. Which is just an amazing response, isn't it? You feast on me and you live. You ignore me and you die. I am the bread that comes from heaven. Verse 32, Jesus said to them, very truly I tell you, it is not Moses who has given you bread from heaven, but my Father who gives you the true bread from heaven. The people are shocked. And then Jesus says again, I am the bread of life. Whoever comes to me will never go hungry, and whoever believes in me will never be thirsty. What do we need more than anything else in the world? We need Jesus. Bread will give you physical life, but Jesus will give you spiritual life. Bread will sustain you for a day, but Jesus will sustain you for eternity. The bread will satisfy your body, but Jesus will satisfy the deepest longings and yearnings of your heart, not just for a day, but for all time. Yes, in every way, Jesus was the deliverer they were hoping for, but they had set their sights too low. Jesus came not to simply overthrow an earthly kingdom, but to overthrow the kingdom of darkness and lead his people into the light. Jesus came not to save one nation, but to save a vast multitude from every nation. How is that salvation achieved? Through Jesus giving us himself. Come back with me to the wilderness in your mind. The bread, the miraculous bread appears on the ground, it is clearly a provision from God. It will clearly sustain them and see them through. But you'll notice that God did not make the bread just appear in their bellies. God didn't make the bread appear in their mouths and then mash their jaws up and down for them. No, the bread is right there in front of you. But you must take it. To refuse would be insane, but still possible, I think. To starve to death in the wilderness when surrounded by bread, it would be tragic, but you can imagine somebody doing it out of their own stubbornness. You are sat in a spiritual desert, but the good news is you're surrounded by the bread of life. If you trust him, you will receive him, and he will sustain you not just for the day, but for all eternity. Jesus is the bread of life, and he is all you need.